There you go. Get it right.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Carter, Director of the Aram Public Library. And with me tonight, we are very excited to have Ruth and Sue from the UW Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Program. Welcome, Sue and Ruth. And they'll be leading us through seed starting, amongst other exciting things to get ready for this year's bounty of vegetables and herbs. And so during the session, please put your questions in the chat, and then we'll have time for everybody to ask questions at the end. So take it away, Ruth.
Okay, well, good evening and a happy Tuesday evening to you all. Give me just a second while I get my screen up and ready to go here. Okay, looking good, everybody?
Ruth, you got it.
Just nod if it's okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming tonight. And Sue and I, between us, have each been individually, we've each been gardening for going on, I hate to say it, coming up on 50 years.
Yeah.
And even after all that time, I still think that seeds are endlessly fascinating. And the fact that you can take this dry crumb of a seed and add some water and just a little bit of care and end up with nutrition and beauty, that's just magic. That's just magic. And so we are glad and honored to be a part of the opening celebration for Aram Public Library's new seed library. And growing from seeds you start now to having new seeds at the other end is a whole other kind of magic. And it takes surprisingly little to grow enough seeds for yourself. So if you do that, I hope that you will share some of your excess seeds with the seed library and keep that growing. But seed starting is a topic for a different day. We're going to take a look at that in August. And in the meantime, tonight's topic is starting seeds indoors. And we're going to do this in two parts. Okay, tonight what we're going to talk about is getting your seed, deciding what to plant and when to plant it, and getting your seeds in the ground and having them pop up, everything you need to do to get that to that point. And then in 3 weeks, we'll do part 2. At that point, your seeds should be up, and we'll be doing part 2, and it'll be everything you need to go from that point until you need to put them in the ground. So the process we'll cover,
Go ahead.
the process that we'll cover is really easy and doesn't require much that you don't already have at home. There are a few types of seeds that may require an extra step or process that we're not going to cover tonight, but there aren't very many of those. And even with those, what we're going to cover tonight is still the basis of what you're going to need to do with those. So this is still the place to begin. So let's get started with a few gardening basics and some organizational ideas.
Here we go. Okay, so what you see in front of you tonight on the screen share are packets, seed packets. And the two on your left of your screen, well, 3. There's your bush beans on your right, contender, pine tree, which is a seed sales, and kale Russian red, that's pine tree company. Territorial Seed Company is yet another one. There's several out there. And what I'm trying to point to you is that all of these seed packets, on the front of the seed packet, they have a brief description about what it is, how long it is until it matures, which is what the broccoli Fiesta F1 says right there, at 65 days. That's what it says. It says it matures, you'll get a head of broccoli at 65 days, okay? And then it gives you a really rough a description about what it is, and then it gives you the weight of all the weight of the total packet, which is the 1/4 gram, and then almost that equals 82 seeds, and that is actually good for a few years. Now, if you flip over that packet, you're going to see what it would look like to the right of that broccoli seed packet, where it has the seed depth seed spacing, soil temp for germination, days to germination, and you thin plants to 24 inches. And then you continue down that seed packet with the seed sowing indoors. That's certainly where we're looking at today. And then sowing outdoors is for a little bit later. Let's look at that a little bit later when we start thinking about transplanting and hardening off in our next session. Growing tips, that will certainly help you a little bit later on as well. Fertilizer, certainly in about 2.5 to 3 weeks after you get those seeds going, you might start seeing some yellowing. You may want to think about doing some weak fertilization. Harvesting, way after the plant is outside and been hardened off. Again, that's the next session. And then this is the other thing. This is the other thing that's really important when you want to do some seeding. It's seed specs. That tells you actually about every 100 seeds, how many seeds are actually viable. They're saying that 75% of that 100 are going to be viable. That means that they will germinate, okay? So you have to base your seeding upon that percentage. If it's 75% and you want 10 plants, you may want to plant just a few more, maybe 10 or 12 more, something like that. So that's what the bush bean on the lower right is looking like. The bush bean cover is right there on top of that. So you want to take a look at them and get some really good information out of that seed packet. So that's the seed packet for you. Unfortunately, we already know we're going to do the dastardly deed and assume that you already know what you want to put in your garden for this year. You look at that seed packet, like I've just described to you, to figure out what you want to grow. You look for disease-resistant varieties. Now, they will say on that seed packet what kind of, what they are resistant to, particularly in tomatoes. So they will tell you that if they're resistant to some sort of disease or fungal infection or any other thing like that. You want to look for those because some of those diseases are airborne and you can't stop it. So you want to try and get the best tasting disease-resistant variety that you can. Make a plan for where you want to put that plant out there in your garden this year, like what we have right there. Mine is on the left-hand side, and that's my seed plan for this year. So I have about 10 of those maps, just like that, for all the years that I have been planting seeds. And it's very important where you want to put those plants because you have to be careful for the next year if you're going to have the garden in the same spot, that you don't put that plant in the same spot next year. Because again, you're thinking about what sort of bugs, what sort of diseases are in that place. You want to put in something new. Make sure you've got your seeds that are ready to go. Because you're going to start planting them today, or maybe you already have. Some seeds will likely be needed to be started indoors. Okay, so some seeds, some plants, they need to take a little bit longer to get what you want. Like onions are like 120 to 150 days, and that's a long time. If you put them out in the garden in April, May, when the soil temperature is right, it's not long enough for you to get that onion, that big full bulb that you're really looking for. So you want to give that extra time. And that's why you start some seeds indoors. The other reason why you might want to start a plant indoors is because you might want to sort of cheat Mother Nature a little bit. You might want to have an early bunch of broccoli to come up maybe in May or June, or some other kind of thing that you want. And certainly that is one reason why you would plant broccoli this year. There are some seeds that you just don't start in the inside at all. And there's lots of them that are yeses, and there's quite a few that are maybes as well. So that's where you got to go next. Take it, Ruth.
Okay. If you're new to starting seeds indoors, I'm just going to plug this in here before I go back to what to start.
Yep.
If you're new to it, I suggest that you start with a small amount of seeds to start, maybe one type of thing. Maybe it's your tomato plants, or maybe it's your broccoli, whatever. It'll give you confidence that you understand the process. And it'll also help you understand whether or not you like doing it. If you don't like doing it, there's no point in investing in any sort of equipment or doing something in a large scale. If you're not going to enjoy it, there's no point in doing it. You might as well buy your transplants. You'll be happier. We want you to be happy. So start small. Okay.
Very small.
Yeah. So, all right. So then in this list of yes, no, maybe, the things in the yes column, they're generally things that either need a long hot season. If you start your tomatoes directly in the ground, for example, they'll come up in June, and you'll get some tomatoes right about the time the frost is going to kill the plants. So you start them early so that you actually get a decent harvest. Or something like hollyhocks, where you start them early so that they'll bloom this year instead of next year. Okay. Some of the ones in the middle, the onions, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflowers, those are cold season ones that you want to give a jump start so that you can have them mature during the cold season, because once it gets too hot, they're not going to do well. In the no category, all of that first group at the top, those are all root vegetables. And if you try, you can try to transplant them, but they have a growing point at the very bottom of the transplant, and it's really easy to damage. And if you do, you're going to end up, instead of one nice long straight carrot, you're going to end up with something that looks more like a jellyfish. So we don't transplant root vegetables. The other ones in the no category are things that you just don't need to. It's work that isn't necessary because they do perfectly well grown directly seeded outdoors. And in the maybe category, there are things that you might do both. You might start some, you might direct seed some. Lettuce in particular falls in that category. I planted dill once about 8 years ago, and I've never needed to plant it again because it keeps reseeding itself. So I mean, it's up to you on a lot of these. With the flowers, you might want to get flowers earlier and longer. So those things work. And then down at the bottom of the maybe category, the squash, melon, cucumbers, pumpkins, and gourds, those are all related to each other. And you can start them indoors, but they have very brittle roots and they're easily damaged when you transplant them. And so it takes them a little while to recover from that transplanting. Whereas if you direct seed them, they don't have that setback. And so the ones you direct seed may very easily catch up to the ones that you transplanted, and you end up with having your produce at the same time, no matter what. So once again, it comes back to, is this work I need to do? I don't bother with those. I direct seed them. It's up to you.
Yep. I direct seed all of the squashes as well. It's just a whole lot easier to deal with, and there's no sense.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. Okay. Next is when you're going to do this.
Yeah. So now you got to know when to start. Well, one of the first things you've got to think about, though, is the killing frost. And we're talking about our last spring killing frost. And as you can tell, we're down there in the lower right-hand corner of the state of Wisconsin, and we're in the green section. And usually in May 3rd to the 9th, we get a killing frost around that time. So you want to keep those tender little plants, you want to keep them out of that killing frost, because that will certainly kill them, if not just damage them. So that's why we're going to use that killing frost date as a way to calculate backwards. So that means we're going to go earlier into the season, which is why we're talking about seed starting now, because this is a pretty good time to start your seeds. Okay. And that's why we're doing it. We're worried about that killing frost. So that's why we're going to work on that. Now, the late frost, You have to have 10 to 12 weeks for onions, shallots, leeks, impatiens, pansy. Notice that the two on the bottom, those are flowers. You can certainly plant the leeks, direct seed the leeks outside, but you're going to get them a little bit later. Okay, early March, that's when you got to start those peppers, eggplants, and basil. They have a little bit longer time to start growing. They're not as quick as a tomato is. That means that they take a little bit longer to start from their seed. And they're just a little bit more finicky than a tomato is. Mid to late March, tomatoes have a tendency to grow very fast, much faster than pepper or an eggplant. And that's why we're starting them a little bit later, because you're going to be worried about if you've got the tomato plants that you start in early March. And I've made this mistake where I've started tomatoes in early March. Those tomato plants, they were very leggy when they went out, and they were under a lot of stress because they couldn't handle all that legginess. But I was a newbie on the block. That was well before I became a master gardener. When I first started gardening about 20 years ago.
I have a friend who gets excited about spring. He likes to start his in January. And they're 3 feet tall.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I don't want anything to do with that. I like to see them growing outside because I don't want to be trugging that big heavy plant over to the garden a little bit later when it's time to transplant. So mid to late, looks like May, mid to late. It's
yes.
covered by the screen. Yeah.
Mid to late April.
That's yep. Or even if at all, on the cucumbers, winter squash, summer squash, melons, and pumpkins. Some flowers you can certainly ignore putting them. You can certainly ignore seeding them outside. You may want to have them just because then you'll know the color of their blooms when you want to put them in your own planters. That's what I'm thinking about some of those flowers. But certainly some of those flowers can certainly be direct seeded outside as well.
Yep. Before I move on to choosing what to put your seeds in, I would just say that there's some leeway in this schedule, okay? Yep. If you have a reason to push the plants one way or the other by a week or 2 weeks, it's not going to be critical in most cases. Maybe your seedlings will be a little smaller than they might have been otherwise, but it's okay to do that. It's not, it has to be March 15th or you're not going to be successful. That's not what we're talking about here. So, okay. Yeah. So if you have been to the library in either Aram in Delavan or at Darien, as part of the new seed library celebration, there are a limited number of these take and make seed starting kits, and they include a planting pot and some potting soil to go with it and a couple of labels. So if you are able to pick up one of those, you have everything you need. But if you are not picking up one of those, then there's lots and lots of options for what you can choose for pots. And these are all things that are available commercially. You can see lots of plastic there. You can see a clay pot. There's a metal pot there, although that particular one has no holes in the bottom, so I would not use it unless I drilled some holes. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Then there are ones that you can actually plant the entire pot out in the garden. And if you were going to start those cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, any of those early indoors, I would use a plantable pot option for those. And so you see one made out of straw. The one in the middle there that says cow pot genuinely is made from dried cow manure. It's a great idea, although they do tend to be expensive. Mm-hmm. Jiffy pots are your standard, what we normally call peat pots, mm-hmm. Although I'm not sure if they're really made of peat anymore. And then over on the left, there are those pellets that you can buy. They're compressed fibers, and then you put them in warm water and they expand to get that item on the left there, and you could plant in those as well. Mm-hmm. And then there are a number of options available through your household. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And Sue is going to show you a bunch of things that she has around her house.
Okay.
You guys have a couple of questions too. It's Michelle. I'm just going to
Hi.
pause for a minute.
Sure.
I'm going to read these questions before you move on to the next part. How long will the seeds last if I don't start them all the first year is question number 1.
It depends in part on the seed and because there's a genetic component. And so some seeds are really only good for a year. That would be onions and parsnips in particular. Most of them will last 3 to 5 years, but you really need to store them carefully. You need to put them in a sealed glass jar. And if you have one of those silica gel packets that they put in with so many things, you can throw that in with your seeds. They need to be out of the light. They need to be in a cool, consistent temperatures. And they need to have low humidity. So if you can give it all of those things, then they will last, most of them, 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And what I do to store my seeds for more than over the winter, what I do is that I double bag them, and then I put them in a glass or a tight sealing turning jar, and I put them in my deep freezer out in the garage. That way they stay really quite stable in that environment.
They will last much longer that way.
Yes.
Things you need to know about that. One is that if you've ever heard of the seed vault at Svalbard, that's what they do. It's a deep freeze. You need to make sure that it's not a freezer that has an automatic defrost cycle, because
Correct.
that makes the temperature go up and down, up and down, up and down. It has to be one that gets frost. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to remember is that if you do freeze them, when you pull them out, you got to let the jar come to room temperature before you open it, because otherwise you're going to pull condensation out of the air and increase the humidity, and that's bad for your seeds.
Mm-hmm. But if you keep them in the refrigerator, like in your refrigerator section of your refrigerator, like in your kitchen, you're going to want to double bag them, because again, what happens in there is that they will collect that condensation that builds up in there, and they will also have a tendency to maybe lose the germination that you're really looking for, because believe it or not, apples send off gases, and that will help reduce the germination rates on your seeds.
Okay, and one more question. Do the cow pots smell?
No, they do not.
Dry cow manure does not smell at all. I know that from my history.
All right, thanks. You guys can keep going.
Okay,
you're
so you're going to show us pots.
Yep, and you're entirely welcome for anything we can give you for information. It's all free for us. We're having a great time at this, trust me. Okay, so you may want to think about recycling and reusing some of those simple little things that you have at home. This is a toilet paper roll. You can also use a paper towel roll cut into half or thirds, about the same length as this. And the reason why you want it about the same length as this is that you want to put about an inch down in water for this toilet paper roll to soak up some of that water. So you can crimp it in place to get a good seal on the bottom. Okay, because you don't want any of that fine germination medium, the soil or the potting mix to go and leak out the bottom. That's why you want to crimp this in the end like that. It will collapse upon itself very easily. You have to work with it quickly. I would not put it in there more than a couple of minutes. When you start seeing it move up a little bit, get it out of there, because believe it or not, it does come apart really quickly with the glue that they use. Not a problem though, it's okay. You can also use an egg carton. I use a paper egg carton sometimes, just for those itty bitty seeds. And all you do is just fill it up a little bit, and you put the seeds in and then you top it off. Okay, we'll show you how to do that a little bit later. The other thing I use This is a grocery bag, a paper grocery bag, okay, paper, and you roll it up on a tin can. And again, you're going to crimp it up on the bottom just to make sure that you get it nice and, just to make sure that the soil doesn't come out a little bit later. And it stays nice and crimped the entire time because remember, you're going to keep it watered. The other thing I use, plastic cups with holes drilled out the bottom. These things are wonderful. These are carry-out containers, okay? All you do is put a hole or two on the bottom for good drainage. You always want to keep good drainage when you start seeds. You don't want to drown your seeds. And the lid on top fits nice and tight, but you don't want to snug it up once you get it planted because you want it to breathe just a little bit, just to keep the air movement around a little bit. It's also great because you can put your label on top of it with a marker or on the side of your container afterwards. Just make sure that anything that's plastic that you may use like this, or how about the deli containers? Again, with a hole poke through on the bottom, you can always use anything like this. Let your mind go. Let your mind be creative. You can use the deeper meat containers after you've really cleaned it out, scrubbed it up with soap and water and some hot water and some maybe some bleach. The reason for that we'll tell you a little bit later. Use this as your drainage. Okay, it really fits cups nicely, or anything else that you want to use. Remember, you're starting small. And the list goes on. Like I said, please be creative in what you use because everything like that is free to the taking. It's in your recycle bin.
Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow. Well, darn it. Excuse me, it shifted on me.
It's okay.
Find where we are. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things, Sue talked a bunch about making sure that you have drainage holes in that. We all know that plants need water, right? What a lot of people don't know is plant roots also need air. So if all of the tiny little spaces in your pot are filled up with water, it can't get any air, so you're going to kill your plants that way. So make sure you have drainage holes, and if whatever you choose doesn't have them, you have to add them. Okay. All right. So how should you choose? Seeds, as you can see from the plate here, come in lots of different sizes. Let me see if I can get this full screen. Okay, seeds, I've got 5 different sizes of seeds on this plate here. You can see some tiny little celery seeds in the lower right. We've got lettuce, which is the next bigger one. There's some peppers in the middle, and then gourds on the top right and pumpkins on the top left. And there is kind of a correlation between the size of the seed and the size of the seedling. So those pumpkin seeds, you can see I put one over on top of that little 6-pack. If I tried to plant that pumpkin seed in that 6-pack, one of those cells, I honestly don't think I could even get it to come up. I mean, it needs something bigger. I would need either the big square pot or preferably the plantable round one there. Okay, so size, choose the size of your pot according to to some degree according to the size of your seed. All right. Make sure it has drainage holes, and if you are not using a pot that is new, you need to make sure that it is not only clean, but preferably sterilized. And I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you how. This is the reason why. Most seedlings have almost no disease issues. That comes later in the plant's life cycle for the most part. But there is this one horrible thing called damping off disease, which is caused by a fungus. And if you look at the picture here, what you'll see is that it looks like these 2 poor little seedlings they're zinnias. So it looks like somebody pinched them right at the soil line and they just collapsed. They're dead. I mean, they're still green. They still look like you might have a chance of reviving them, but you don't. If you damage the stem like that, There's no bringing it back. So damping off disease is very hard to treat, and it comes on so fast. I mean, by the time you notice the symptoms, it's probably too late. But it is very easy to prevent. And one of the ways to prevent it is to make sure that you don't bring it in. So that's why you want to have clean and sterile pots. Okay. And the same goes for your tools and the spaces that you work in. Now, the way that you would sterilize a plastic pot or a clay pot or something like that, a couple of options. You can make a bleach water solution, which ends up being 10% bleach. It would be 9 parts of water with 1 part of bleach, and size it according up or down according to how much total volume you need. If you're making, 9 cups of water and 1 cup of bleach or whatever, but it ends up being a 10% bleach solution. And you put your pots in there and you leave them for 15 to 30 minutes. That's how long it takes. Okay. Other alternatives, you can use an alcohol-based sanitizer. Make sure it has at least 70% alcohol. You can use a spray, like a disinfecting spray like Lysol or a bleach wipe. Time is usually a factor with how effective all of them are. So be sure you read your directions and when you sterilize your pots or whatever you're using. Okay. And then we'll touch on the rest of that as we continue on through. But damping off is the only disease you need to worry about with seedlings.
Okay.
All right.
And I will.
Now you've got a pot.
Yep.
Go ahead.
My turn?
Yep.
Okay. And I would, Ruth, can you reverse back to that, to the previous screen, the previous slide,
sorry.
please?
There you go.
There you go. I would, if you are going to use bleach, I would have rubber gloves on my hands because you will get burned, even though the bleach is already been diluted in that 9 parts water to 1 part bleach. Okay, you get really red hands from it. Believe me, I've had it.
Oh yeah,
it really
and also
burns for quite a while.
Flashes easily, so watch the rest of your clothes too.
And I would wear an apron and some old clothes perhaps that you don't mind getting bleached out or burned through, because it will weaken the fiber. Okay. Yep. And keep in mind also, if you use the paper products that I had, you don't need to sterilize them. Okay. Those are going to be considered as a plantable pot that you can put right away into the garden, so you don't have to worry about sterilizing them. Okay. But anything else that I showed you was plastic, you need to sterilize. Okay. Because you don't know what was there last. That's why you don't want to mess with the damping off disease at all. Okay. It's a pain in the butt, because then it just spreads throughout all your seedlings really quickly when you find out.
And it makes you very sad when you put in all that work and they're gone.
It's a bummer. It's a total bummer. Okay. So now we're going to go into the planting medium. Now we have the okay potting soil, which is right there on the right-hand side. And the best planting soil is right here on the left. And it's a germination mix. That means it's meant for seed starting. And what I usually do is that I just go to my favorite big box store and I go get my seed starting germination soil mix from them directly, from a reputable company that you trust. Okay. Bad is potting soil or garden soil. Okay. It's not good for those little seedlings. It doesn't have enough fertilization in it. It doesn't have the right, remember, you're dealing with itty bitty seeds, some of them smaller than a pinhead. Okay. And some of them are big enough for you to eat, like a pumpkin seed, but they still like that nice, tender seed germination soil mix, so that you may want to invest in just a little itty bitty bag that you can get for, like, I don't remember how much I paid for mine, probably $8-9. Okay. And it's well worth your investment. Just remember that seedlings are very delicate. You have the seed starting germinating mix that's there on the left is already been sterilized, so you don't have to worry about that part of it for it to be clean for your tender seeds to start in. And all you have to do is just make sure before you use that you get a little bit of moisture on there, because it's really difficult to work with soil that's been dry in the bag. So you want to get some water put in there so that you can get just a little bit of moisture into that soil to start with, because if you try and put water on top of this after you put in the seed, you're worried you'll probably wash a good part of it away, and it'll just create a big like an airlock up on top of that soil. So you want to make sure that soil is kind of wet, crumbly to the touch, a little bit more moisture than that. Okay, you don't want to wring it out wet. You just want to make sure that it's crumbly, and you can make a little bit of a pile with it, with your fist like that. Okay. That's part of what you got to deal with. Okay. And I would just invest in that seed starting germination mix there on the left. Okay.
They come in different size bags.
Yes, they do.
I buy 3 cubic feet at a time, and I usually need 2 bags, but I start a lot of plants. But you can get a tiny, you can get a person-sized bag at the store. The other thing I would mention about the potting mix, these 2 that you see the pictures of here, they have the same components. They're basically peat moss and vermiculite, but the seed starting mix is ground a lot finer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Again, you want to make sure that the seed touches that soil with the moisture in it. Thank you, Ruth, for making sure that's why you want a really small crumble in that seed starting potting mix. I'm a little nervous, guys.
Doing good. Okay, so then you take your moistened seed starting mix and you start to fill your container. And I would suggest that you start by filling it about halfway first, or what might look like 3/4 of the way, because it's very fluffy. So you put it in, fill it part way, and then push it down into the bottom, and then fill it up the rest of the way. Because what you want to do is you want to have tiny air spaces, not big honking ones. So when you have it filled properly, you should be able to push down on it and it should spring back up again. Okay. Mm-hmm. You don't want to pack so tight that it has no give. And as you can see mm-hmm. with this little 4-pack here, I haven't quite filled it all the way to the top. I left it so that there's the dividers separate the individual cells, because then when you go to water it, the water will stay in each cell that you put it in. It won't flow from one over into the other. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you're worried. Now you got your seed pots started. You got your pots ready to go with those seeds, and now you're going to start thinking about how deep do you want to plant those seeds. Well, take a look at that seed packet again, and some of them on all of them will say how deep to put that seed. They'll be at 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch, sometimes as big as the seed is, that's about how far down you want to put the plant into the soil. And there on the left-hand side of this screen, we have taken a dowel that you're going to use as a dibble. A dibble is something that makes a hole into your soil. And it's been marked with 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1 inch. And you're going to use that dibble and make sure that you use that line for each and every one of those seeds that you're going to plant. So squash seeds are usually down at about 1 inch. And you want to make that you want to bury that dibble as far down as that inch marker will go to from the top of the soil all the way down. And that's where you're going to put that seed, is in that hole that you've just made. It's the same thing with the smaller seeds that use 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/8 of an inch. It's the same thing. Okay, and some of them even use just a 1/16 of an inch, which is you're basically putting it on top of the soil and just putting some soil on top. That's all you're doing. The seeds that I have started here, down here on the right-hand side, those are my paper pots and my toilet paper pots. So you can see that I've got them the soil put in there, and I put them down about 3/8 of an inch below it. And that's where my final resting mark would be. And then what I do is that I just make a dibble out of with that dibble. I just make a little hole in there, and that's how you see those little broccoli that are coming up right there. And those are peppers and eggplants there in the paper cups in the background. They're just starting to emerge. I took that picture about two and a half weeks ago now. The broccoli was started, looks like it says it started about 3/3 because I want to get them out in April and May. So you have to make sure that you have everything labeled, just like I show you here. You want your date and your type of vegetable or flower that it is, along perhaps with the variety. And you might want to put in how many seeds that you have in that packet, in that little pot, so you can tell how much actually does germinate like that. So there you go.
Let's see. One of the things that I like to show you about the broccoli seedlings here is that Sue has planted more than one seed in each of the little toilet paper rolls. That's usually, okay, so if you remember way back when we were looking at the seed packets, one of them said a 75% germination rate. It's very rare that you're going to get 100%. So I always put at least 2 seeds in each pot, sometimes 3, just depends on what it is. And
the reason why I also did that for those is because those seeds are a little bit older. They were 2 to 3 years older. So you would
expect the germination rate to be even less.
Yes, definitely.
Yep. Okay, so this slide is showing you how you can manage to get the seed from the packet into the pot, which sounds like a silly thing to talk about, but it can be a challenge. Some of them obviously are big enough that you can just use your fingers. I find that little knife that you see slanting across the plate there, I got from a seed company. They were doing a giveaway, and I use it to pick up the tomato or pepper seedlings and transfer them over. Actually, what I usually do is I pour the seeds into my hand, and I move my hand over the pot and then use the knife, because when you're trying to move the seeds on the knife, if they're round seeds, they like to roll off the knife. So the closer you are to where you're going, the better it is, believe me. And then another trick that somebody told me about recently, for a good way to transfer small seeds, is with that pencil eraser. If you have a paper towel and you get it wet, and then you touch the tip of the eraser to the wet, and then touch it to a single seed. And if you spread the seeds out on the plate, you can pick them up one at a time, and then just flick it off the end of the eraser into the hole that you've got prepared. A couple of easy ways to go there. Okay, so then you're gonna cover them over to the appropriate depth with the soil and firm them in gently so that you have good contact between the seed and the soil. That's important because otherwise it won't soak up the water and it won't be able to germinate. All right, and then after it's planted, you're gonna need to do a few more things. First thing is water the seeds in. And the key point to know, several things to know about watering. One of them is that you should use plain water. It should be at room temperature. So if you need to, run out a gallon jug of water and let it sit for a while, that's fine. If you can avoid softened water, usually if houses have a water softener, it's usually only connected to the hot water tap. So you use the cold water and let it warm up, okay? And then the other thing to know, another thing to know is that about watering is that you need to be able to give it a very gentle amount of water. If you flood your compartment, you stand a good chance of displacing not only the soil, but the seeds. And then you're going to have 2 or 3 on the very edge of the cell or the planting pot. And it's not going to be a happy thing. So here's some options: a really fine spout on a watering can, or I'm a fan of the turkey baster. Some people use a mister, that works. The other thing that you see there is the bottle with the watering rose on top of it. I think it's called a bottle top waterer or bottle cap waterer. You can buy them online. They have really, really fine holes, which gives you a very, very gentle application of water. And then there's another option, which is called bottom watering. And it's not something I have much experience with, but you do, Sue. Could you explain bottom watering?
Okay, so like I earlier said, by the way, water all my plants through the bottom watering system, because I am worried about the damping off on, and I find that when I water them on top, they get a little bit more of that damping off disease that I don't want them to have. So what I do is that when I have them in your drainage container, what I do is that I just water. I take the watering can with the long spigot, and I just put it in at the edge of the tray right here, and I put in just enough water to go up on top, just about 1/4 of an inch up on the side of your little pot. Okay, does that make sense? Please nod yes if you understand. Thank you. And I watch to make sure that gets absorbed. And if it gets absorbed really quickly, I'm going to put in more water. Okay. The trick is, do not let them sit in water for too long of a time. Okay. Once you see them slow down, let them be. Okay. Let them be. Drain off the excess. Okay. That's what the drainage is for. Okay. Make sense? Hope so. If not, ask more questions. We'll answer.
So basically you're using capillary action to suck the water up from the tray into the cell, into the soil.
Yes.
Okay, so in addition to watering, the next thing, if you haven't already done it, is to label your pots. And trust me, this is a really important step. Especially if you're growing more than one variety or of tomato, for example, you're never going to be able to tell them apart once they get bigger. So be sure you label them. Or tell a broccoli from a cauliflower, from a Brussels sprout. It's a challenge. So labeling is very important. Couple of options there. That's a piece of a mini blind that's been cut up. If you have one of those take and make kits, you have a couple of those labels in there. You can cut up any sort of plastic and use it. That works fine. You can write on a piece of masking tape and stick it to the side. If it's a light colored container, you can write on it with a marker, anything that works for you, okay? Some things to watch out for though is if you're recycling something, once again, you need to make sure it's clean and sterile. And if you are using any sort of marker, you want to make sure it's one that's not going to fade very quickly. That one that says garden marker there is, in theory, it's not supposed to fade. In reality, it does, but not until the end of the growing season. But you can also just use a pencil. They don't fade and they're easy to come by.
Exactly. And sometimes what I use is just a milk bottle that's been cut up in itty bitty pieces, 3 to 3.5 inches by probably about an inch. And that's just a simple little thing. And I use the garden marker, make sure that this is sterile again. And it's for your labeling system. But remember, anything that gets near that plant or that seedling, you want to make sure it's sterile. Okay. So this is a real simple thing to have.
Yeah. And when you're trying to put a label inside a 6-pack, the labels are only going to stick up like a 1/2 inch.
Yes.
So you're not going to have room for, the whole 25 yards worth of stuff you might want to put on there. So you can make a code and have a key code in your garden journal that explains, if you just put C, this is the voice of experience, Well, seed could be cucumber or celery or celeriac or any of a number of other things, but
Cauliflower.
yeah, cauliflower. So if you can't fit it on the label, have a supplement that gives you the key.
Exactly.
All right. So then once it's labeled, and don't move on to anything else until you label, 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 label. I can't say it enough. All right.
Label.
Yes. And then you need to cover your tray or your pot with some sort of something to maintain the humidity and to slow down how quickly it's going to dry out. On the left here, we've got commercial stuff that they call these humidity domes, and you put them on as soon as you have your seeds planted and your labeling done, and then you'll take them off once your seedlings begin to come up. On the right, you can see I've got a, this is a recycled option. I think it came originally with blueberries or some sort of other fruit in it, but it's got drainage holes in the bottom, which is why I have it on a cookie sheet. And it's got an attached cover. So lots of different possibilities. You can also just put it in a plastic bag. But if you do use a plastic bag, you want to make sure the bag doesn't touch the surface of the soil. You want to give your seedlings some room.
And by the way, that's how I started, is right there on the right-hand side. It was with a table lamp like that, a clip lamp, and a board on my windowsill. That's exactly how I started.
Yeah. So
okay,
make sure you're to protect you wherever. Okay, we're going to talk next about where to put your pots of seedlings, but wherever you put them, you're going to need something to protect your furniture. So if they're not already in a tray, get a tray to put them in. So
there we go.
All right. So take a deep breath. We've passed a huge milestone here. They're planted. Hooray! Okay, so now where are you going to put them?
Yeah, now that's a good question, isn't it?
Yes,
now,
that is a good question.
Okay, location is a very important thing. You want to make sure that the area that you have is going to give you a decent amount of airflow and also not so much drafts coming through. What I have showing you there, there on that slide is where the temperatures that are needed for a seed to start, okay? It varies between 60 degrees and 85 degrees. That's quite a heck of a jump in there. And most plants will germinate at 70 to 85 degrees. Now, I don't know about you, but my house is nowhere near 70 degrees or even 85 degrees. I'm down to the 65, 68 mode, okay? So you want to kind of like make a domed area, if you will, that's been covered with plastic or maybe a blanket and a sheet. And we got some things to show you on that as well, coming up very shortly. And all you do is just create like a really warm spot for them to hibernate, for them to start in. And what I have there right there on that picture on top on the shelf right there is what they call a seedling heat mat. And what you do is that you put a tray, the planting tray on top of that, and it will help germinate. It will keep that heat coming up through so that it will help germinate your plant. Now, this is something that costs $25 to $35. I would not recommend you getting this. I would recommend you putting that on your wish list, okay? Especially if you like gardening a little bit later, okay? This is something that you kind of like want to, like maybe 2 or 3 years in it, you go, hey, I really like this. Then you could start investing into some seed helping aids like that. And the reason why I bought this seed mat is way back when I did a community supported agriculture system. That means I had a large home garden for 20 families. And I was starting a lot of vegetable seeds. And I mean like 24 flats of seeds. And I needed this seeding heat mat to help me start all those plants up, all those seeds out. So that's why I have it still in my stuff since I've retired. So, but that's one thing that you can use. Certainly, one of the other things you can use is just a simple little heat lamp or a desk lamp, just aimed over that, like we showed you in the previous slide. And that will certainly help you get the heat that's in there from that heat lamp and get those seeds up, okay? Your main goal is to get those seeds up. You can do it a variety of ways. Don't panic. Location in your home, try and make it a place that doesn't have too much draft. You can put it a sunny south, east, or a west window is really good. A north window is not great because it's really kind of like shady when you shady light when you think about when you're outside. And even the best windows that are south, east, and west, those are again underneath a shade tree. They're not the best, but if that's what you've got, then that's what you use. Try and make it a place that's kind of warm, but not too cold. Maybe on top of a radiator or on top of a refrigerator where it's nice and warm up there. Nobody will bother it. You could do that kind of thing. That will work out great, okay? No sweats, make it easy.
Okay, temperature is probably the thing that has the biggest impact on your seeds coming up. So that's a critical thing to think about. But another thing to think about is air and light, okay? And light is more of an issue once your seedlings begin to poke through the dirt, but it's something to think about now. And some seeds do actually need light to germinate. So what you're looking at here is my light setup. I have it in my basement, so I have air circulation because it's open to the air, but not cold breezes. It's a very simple wooden frame with a shop light on it, okay? Mm-hmm. And you can see there the chains on the left and the right. They allow me to raise and lower the lights, which is something that you may need to do because they need to have that intense light pretty close. Okay, seedlings need 15 to 18 hours of intense light per day. And I don't think we even have that many hours of daylight right now. So really electric lights on a timer are the best choice for your seedlings. And I do put my plants under the lights right away because, as I said, some seeds do need light to germinate. Mm-hmm. What type of light should it be? You have a number of choices. This is fluorescence. And as I said, this is my setup. Here's Sue's setup. You want to talk about your lights, Sue?
Yes, yes. See, so as you can tell, I've got it right there by an outside door that's right there behind it. And what I did when it was really, really chilly outside, like 35 below here on the nights, is that I put an extra flannel blanket on the back of it. And I put a bigger sheet, like a king size sheet, to wrap around it. And the reason why I did that is I wanted to keep that heat inside that little area to keep the temperature at the right amount. Remember when I was saying 70 to 85 degrees? It was that warm in there, okay? And the other reason why, number two, I wanted to keep my cats out of the seeding trays, okay? Cats with onion breath, that really is nasty, okay? And you know that they've eaten onions because you smell it on their breath. And then you got a snipped onion plant that may not grow so well later. Sometimes they do great damage to them, sometimes they don't. So that's why I have that up there like that. And then all I simply do, and you can see the chains there again on the left and on the right. I can adjust that up and down as needed. You can see that some of the plants were a little taller, so I negotiated it and made sure that the lighting is 2 to 6 inches away from that plant the entire time. And I check it daily. I check it daily to make sure that those plants are right about at that same location. Now, I use LED bulbs, LEDs, because they're coming into play. You want to make sure that they're a broad spectrum lamp, and they'll usually give you a little plant sign on the box, and it will tell you that it's okay, to use for a broad spectrum. So that's what you use.
Yeah. The pictures on the right, which you may have a little difficulty seeing, the lights come in all kinds of configurations. That square one on the top right that has the red and blue lights, that's an LED grow light, okay? And it's growing some sweet potato slips. On the bottom, the bar that you see that also has purplish light, it has some white, some red, and some blue diodes in it. That's also an LED. That one's only 2 feet long. So if you don't need a 4-foot shop light, don't get a 4-foot shop light. Get a small grow light. Okay. The grow lights also come in rounds. You can see one, and behind Katerina and Sue, there's your basic compact fluorescent. Either of the grow lights, the round one or the compact fluorescent, would fit in a fixture like this one. The gooseneck lamps, whether they're clip-on or floor lamps, they have that adjustable neck so you can keep moving it as your plants grow or as you change to something that you need to keep them closer. But Sue was right. The lights need to be 2 to 6 inches from the top of your plant. 2 inches if you're using fluorescents, and up to 6 inches if you're using the LEDs. The only thing you should not use is an incandescent bulb. They just get too hot. They'll cook your plants. And I have a few suggestions if you don't have any artificial lights and a south window. A window is all you have. It can work. A south window, it's not, your seedlings won't be quite as good, but they will still be acceptable. South window is the best. Leave the curtains open so you don't get cold breezes, from convection currents behind the drapes. And keep the plants as close to the window as you can without touching the window, because as you move further away, the light intensity decreases incredibly, very quickly. And then you'll notice, because the light only comes from one side, your plants will start to stretch toward the window. And so you turn them around the next day so that the short sides or the longer side starts growing towards the window. And if you keep turning it as it grows toward the window, you'll get a relatively straight seedling when you get to the point where you're ready to transplant. All right, so you found a spot, you've got your lights, you've got a nice warm temperature, and the magic happens. There they are. These happen to be pepper seedlings just poking their way through. So what do you do once they come up?
Well, what you do is that when you start seeing them poking out like this, and they're just starting to reach that dome that that plastic film that you have over them, then you are going to take that away, and you're going to make sure that they have plenty of water. Okay, so again, bottom watering, that's how I do it. Some people don't like the bottom water. Just make sure that the area is nice and moist throughout, and you want to make sure that they'll come up well. Okay, just a little bit of water down there at the bottom of that tray is probably the best advice I can give you. Make sure that the bottom of the planted pots can reach that water that's in the bottom on the tray. Okay, it's not going to do any good if the planted pot can't reach the water that's in the tray. Make sure that can reach. Make sure that you continue to have a little bit of that heat. This is the point when you start getting them at this point right here. you can take away the heat from them. They like 60 to 70 degrees. So they're right back into your world where you're 65 to 68 degrees, wherever your home, wherever your home is set. It usually, they do pretty well at that point. But don't get it below 60 degrees. The reason why you don't want that is because that will speed the fungal growth on it. And then that's a whole new problem that you just don't want to have. So try and keep it at that sweet spot there between 60 and 70 degrees, okay? Ruth, you're gonna talk about air circulation? Or did I miss something?
I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about with it. It helps if you are not bottom watering, if you are watering by some other method, it's helpful to water in the morning and let the air circulate around and begin to dry the pot out. I think you can see the difference. Water when the pot begins, the surface of the soil begins to look dry. You can see the color difference between the two sides of this 4-pack. The ones on the right, they're ready to be watered. The ones on the left don't need it yet. But you want to wait until they do get close to that level of dry before you water them, and then water in the morning or bottom water, because the fungal disease that causes damping off disease is more active at night. So if the surface can dry more before evening, you reduce your chances of getting the damping off disease.
There you go.
Okay, so that is going to get you through the first I'm sorry, let me backtrack for just a second. The amount of time that it's going to take for your seeds to come up is partly genetic. So some of them, your tomatoes might be up in as little as 3 to 4 days. Your peppers and some of the other things might be 2 to 3 weeks. So read your seed packets. The information should be there about when you should expect an arrival. And then—
I like being pregnant.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So that's what we got. And that'll get you through for tonight. And that'll get you through your first month of seed starting. And next time on April 13th, in 3 weeks from tonight, we're going to talk about everything you need to do as your plants have grown, when you begin to need to move them into either bigger pots or spread them out more, to the point where you can put them out in the open garden. So that's it that we have. That's all we have for tonight. And we're ready for whatever other questions there might be.
So thank you, Ruth and Sue. There is actually a question. Do you use any kind of thermometer to monitor the temp near the plants, or do you trust your home thermostat?
No, I do not have a thermometer that I use inside. I find that those can be pretty pricey, and usually I just watch and wait, and I trust my seeding mat. I check my seeding mat every three days. You can feel the gentle heat on that seeding mat. Without that seeding mat, with me, the way I have it covered and everything, if I see moisture growing on the inside, I'm content that everything's going to be okay. Ruth, what about you?
It's not a bad idea to put a thermometer nearby. It certainly would help build your confidence if you're relatively new to this. And it's a good way to check for different places in your house, even before you plant your seedlings, to see if you can find a good location. If you decide you like this and you're someone who likes to geek out about things, they actually even make soil thermometers that you can use with the seedling heat mats that will adjust it. But in general, those heat mats, if you use them, all they do is they raise the ambient temperature about 10 degrees. Mm-hmm. So if your house is at 68, it's going to make the soil in the pots to about 78 degrees, which is pretty much perfect for most of what you're going to do. But it's not a bad idea to have a thermometer nearby.
I'd also like to ask you guys, if you want, you can take your, turn your mics on and go ahead and ask Ruth and Sue directly. I'm going to shut the recording off